The old adage holds true. Wherever there's land, people will argue over it. Antarctica has been neutralized by the 1961 Antarctic Treaty. 50 nations, including the US, Russia, and China, agreed no country will build military bases or mine minerals there. But that moratorium expires in 2048. When the treaty ends, governments will surely eye the last unclaimed continent. With climate change accelerating, by mid-century, parts of Antarctica may become more temperate. Scientists warn it could be as mild as Norway's climate today. 7 nations already stake formal claims: Argentina, Chile, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, Norway, and France, but only as scientific sectors, not sovereign states. Research stations, however, are scattered randomly over the ice, staffed by about 30 countries and over 70 labs. In summer, roughly 4,000 people live there. In winter, only about 1,000. Look at the map. Most claims converge in meridians at the pole. The one exception is the Antarctic Peninsula, the long arm reaching towards South America. 4 countries claim that tiny strip: Argentina, Chile, Brazil, and the UK, because it's the warmest, liveliest part of Antarctica. For now, Antarctica is officially governed by science and cooperation. Russia, as successor to the explorers, and the US, with by far the largest scientific presence, publicly agree: no national borders should cross the ice. The continent is meant to be a place of peace and friendship, not an international real estate dispute. But behind the scenes, everyone is watching. In fact, China has rapidly increased its footprint. As of 2024, it opened its 5th Antarctic station on Inexpressible Island in the Ross Sea. Beijing declared it wants to be a polar great power, and Australia, New Zealand, and the US now wonder if those crystal-clear intentions hide something else.
2 centuries ago, Antarctica was a blank spot on the map. In July 1819, the wooden sailing ships Vostok and Mirny, captained by Russian naval officers Fabian Bellingshausen and Mikhail Lazarev, left Kronstadt, near St. Petersburg, on a remarkable voyage. They had 190 men, 2 years of provisions, and a royal commission. Officially, it was a scientific expedition, though even then, no one believed the Tsar would refuse a chance to beat the British in discovery. After 751 days and more than 92,000 kilometers of navigation, they accomplished something monumental. On January 28, 1820, or January 16, Old Style, they approached the icy coastline of what would be called Queen Maud Land. This is credited as the first sighting of the Antarctic continent, revealing the 6th continent of Earth, the coldest, driest, most forbidding place imaginable. And yet, despite the glory, Alexander I did something unexpected. He made no claim. No formal possession, no colony, no flag. Russia already owned vast territories: Siberia, Alaska, soon to be sold, and that southern land was all ice. In a letter home, Bellingshausen praised the men and their discoveries, but the emperor quietly said, "We have enough land." He sent medals and honors, but never asserted sovereignty. I shudder to think what might have been. If Russia had cried "mine" in 1820, Antarctica's history could be very different. Instead, the discovered coastline remained terra nullius, nobody's land, for many decades. Other expeditions came, British, American, French, but nobody planted a flag or founded a colony. After Bellingshausen's expedition returned to Kronstadt, July 1821, Russia quietly turned its attention elsewhere. The South Pole remained a curiosity, not a prize worth claiming. For a century, Antarctica was largely ignored. It wasn't until the Cold War era that the continent's value dawned on world leaders. Fearing a Soviet grab, Western nations hurried to negotiate. In 1959, 12 countries signed the Antarctic Treaty, effective 1961. Under it, no country owns Antarctica. No bases except research, no weapons, no nuclear tests. Antarctica became a giant scientific preserve. To this day, the treaty still stands. The ice belongs to everyone, and to none.
Today, Antarctica is less about empires and more about science and hidden worlds. Beneath 4 kilometers of ice lies Lake Vostok, one of more than 140 subglacial lakes discovered under the Antarctic plateau. It's like a buried alien ocean. Remarkably, Lake Vostok's water remains liquid at about -3 degrees Celsius due to geothermal heat at its floor. All around it is darkness and pressure for millions of years. This isolation fuels a tantalizing question. Is there life in Lake Vostok? In the 1990s, American and British scientists drilled through the ice cap, almost reaching the lake water. They retrieved ice cores that had frozen from lake water. Genetic analysis was astonishing. They found DNA belonging to over 1,600 species, including surprisingly complex organisms. About 6% of these DNA sequences were eukaryotes, organisms with a nucleus from animals to algae. One sequence matched bacteria normally found only in fish intestines, and others resembled rotifers and mollusks. Did real fish or shrimpy creatures once inhabit Vostok's open waters? Some scientists speculate Lake Vostok was an open lake until about 14 million years ago, giving fish and crustaceans time to adapt to the encroaching freeze. I have to admit, reading this made my jaw drop. It sounds like an episode of The X-Files. Unknown DNA, potential fish under kilometers of ice, but these were real research papers. Of course, there's a catch. The American results were controversial. Drilling fluids can carry DNA from the surface downward, contaminating samples. Russian teams pointed out that you can't distinguish a piece of moss from above from a native organism without unbelievably clean sampling. The Russian drilling effort took extra care. When they finally pierced the lake in 2012, they did it with sterile pressurized fluid. Early reports claimed discovery of microbial DNA with no match in any database. One researcher excitedly compared it to hypothetical Martian bacteria. It was that different. But in the end, those sequences were found to be simple, primitive bacteria, just earthly microorganisms, albeit with some novel genes. No alien fish or complex creatures turned up after all. The bottom line, so far, no multicellular life is confirmed under the ice. If there are no little fish swimming in Vostok, perhaps we should be thankful. Any vertebrate eking out an existence in eternal darkness with no food from above would seem like a true alien, little green man of the deep, if you will. Antarctica's scientific experiments go beyond biology. At the South Pole is the IceCube Neutrino Observatory, a cubic kilometer of instrumented ice. Thousands of optical sensors are buried deep in the ice, watching for faint flashes when neutrinos, ghost-like cosmic particles, collide with the ice. IceCube has detected neutrinos from exploding stars and possibly beyond our galaxy. In essence, Earth itself becomes a giant telescope, using Antarctic ice to study the far cosmos. It reminds me that this frozen wilderness is not only a time capsule of Earth's past, but also a window to the universe. The surface of Antarctica hides enormous secrets. Under that cold desert of white are mountain ranges as big as the Alps. The biggest surprise is the Gamburtsev subglacial mountains.
This range is roughly 1,300 kilometers long and up to 3,390 miles high, yet nobody knew it existed until the International Geophysical Year in 1958. All of it sits beneath up to 4 kilometers of ice. Scientists only discovered this with seismic studies. Imagine traversing a snowy wasteland, unaware that giant peaks lurk underneath. It's another reminder we know more about Mars's surface than we do about what lies beneath Antarctica's ice. Despite the vast ice, Antarctica has no time zones. There is no official Antarctic time. Every station simply uses the clocks of the home country or supply lines. One morning on the Ross Ice Shelf, you might wake to New Zealand time, the next to GMT. And despite being a cold desert, Antarctica holds 70% of all Earth's fresh water in its ice. Paradoxically, it's the driest continent, only about 18 millimeters of precipitation per year, even less than the Sahara. One could travel Antarctica for years without finding a drop of rain or snow. Some places on Antarctica are literally without ice. The McMurdo Dry Valleys on the coast have no glaciers or snow. The air is so dry and the katabatic winds so strong that moisture sublimates away. These valleys, often compared to Mars, were even used by NASA to test the Viking Mars landers in the 1970s. One can stroll in those valleys wearing shorts, it's that bone-dry though bitterly cold, and gaze at barren hills that feel truly alien. Meanwhile, the ocean around Antarctica is astonishingly pure. In the Weddell Sea, you can see nearly 80 meters down into the water, as clear as distilled water. Icebergs calving from Antarctica can be immense. The largest recorded in recent memory, iceberg B-15, 2000, was about 295 kilometers long by 37 kilometers wide, roughly the length of Great Britain. Just picture it. An iceberg as long as a country, and some of them have unnerving features. Explorers have reported icebergs with perfectly straight edges and right-angle facets, as if someone had sawed them off. In an eerie turn, conspiracy-minded viewers ask, who cut these geometric ice forms? Did an ancient civilization build piers under the ice? We may never know. On a lighter note, Antarctica, despite having no residents, has its own country code and even a novelty currency. The Internet top-level domain is .aq, and the international phone code +672. There's even a novelty Antarctic dollar minted for collectors. It highlights how Antarctica sits in a legal limbo, treated like a country on paper but inhabited only by penguins and scientists. Given all this, you might think Antarctica has always been frozen. But historical maps tell a curious story. Several 16th-century charts depict Antarctica's coastline without ice. The most famous is the Peary Race map, 1513. Examined closely, it shows what looks suspiciously like Queen Maud Land and maybe Antarctic Peninsula, drawn to scale, ice-free. Likewise, the Oronce Finet map 1531 sketches an entire southern continent with ice-free coasts and even the mythical Hyperborea at the North Pole. These maps were made long before any Antarctic expedition. How could early cartographers draw the outline of a land no explorer had visited? Mainstream historians insist these are coincidences or copy errors, but the resemblance is striking. I've stared at those old parchments, thinking, did sailors in the Middle Ages actually chart a green Antarctica? The story gets wilder. Alternate history researchers suggest that before the 16th century, Earth's climate was radically different. Some claim the poles were warm and lush. Picture Antarctica as an archipelago of ice-free islands covered with forests, while Greenland was a green landmass. There is some support. In 1389, the German traveler Adam Olearius wrote that Greenland was almost entirely ice-free. In the late 1400s, the Italian scholar Giovanni Pontano collected sailor reports of Greenland's paradise of mild climate and herds of reindeer. Medieval Norsemen had cities in Greenland as late as the 15th century, like Gardar, a bustling town with churches and trade shops. If Greenland could stay green, maybe Antarctica once did too. In this view, something dramatic happened around the 16th century. The poles suddenly iced over. Some propose an abrupt pole shift or massive volcanic winter plunged Earth into a little ice age. In fact, the first known European landing on Antarctica was by 1820. The gap of 300+ years fits the timeline of these maps. For believers in this theory, Antarctica didn't quietly freeze 35 million years ago, as textbooks say. It may have been a sudden event in human history. Whether you buy the pole shift theory or not, medieval Europe surely saw unusual climate swings. Between 1500 and 1525, the continent endured a series of calamities. Archival chronicles recount dramatic floods and chills that defy modern climate timelines. For example, Melkabe's chronicles in Austria detail a flood in 1502 that began on the eve of Ascension Day and lasted 10 days straight. Cities along the Danube were inundated, homes were swept away, the water covered fields and orchards with sand and debris. Then from 1502 to 1508, Europe suffered near constant flooding year after year. As if that wasn't enough, the summer of 1525 brought an unimaginable turn, a deep freeze in the middle of summer. Eyewitnesses describe that by mid-1525, a ferocious cold snapped over Central Europe. In Vienna, people left their homes and froze on the spot. Birds became stone cold and fell from the sky. Towns and villages fell silent under snow. Entire populations perished outdoors. Even the Danube River froze solid enough for people, horses, and carts to traverse over it. By some accounts, every water source on plains froze. These were not normal winter chills, they were sudden out-of-season ice. Contemporary chronicles from Poland, Rome, and especially Muscovy confirm it. In 1525, Roman records state a horrible cold descended in summer, covering land with snow and ice, and killing many. In Moscow, diplomat Sigismund von Herberstein noted that ice formed instantly in mid-air, spitting turned to ice crystals before it fell. Roads were choked with frozen corpses of people and animals. The next year, 1526, saw winters so severe that earth cracked from cold and fountains froze over. In Russia, they said the frosts were so fierce that the once green forests turned black with freezing. When I pieced these accounts together, I half expected to find them in a science fiction novel. Floods, summers that felt like winters, it reads like the end of the world. Some historians call it the onset of the Maunder Minimum, or Little Ice Age, but the abruptness is hard to explain. Could such drastic climate changes in Europe hint that something strange happened globally? It's impossible to answer, but the simultaneity, Greenland freezing over as Europe floods or freezes, is compelling. In fact, Greenland's ice sheet grew phenomenally in that period. Reports say by the late 1500s, Greenland's harbors were choked with ice so thick that ships could not land. In a few short decades, that isle went from the Greenland to a frozen fortress. Compare that to geology. Antarctica's ice is supposed to have taken 30 to 35 million years to form. It makes one ask, could something on Earth cause polar regions to freeze rapidly? Volcanoes? Asteroids? An unexplained shift in Earth's tilt? We may never know. Despite its ice, Antarctica has fire. The most famous volcano is Mount Erebus, Ross Island, still belching gas and occasional lava. Often called the volcano of the South Pole, Erebus is the southernmost active volcano and constantly glows red at its summit. Nearby, Mount Terror, if you recall the names of those same explorers, is dormant but sharp. Hidden under West Antarctica's ice lies the massive Mount Sidley, a dormant volcano as high as 4,000 miller under 1 to 2 kilometers of ice. Researchers have also detected geothermal hotspots under the ice, suggesting other subglacial volcanoes. In fact, at least 2 volcanoes in Antarctica have erupted in the last 200 years. Any under-ice eruption could quickly melt local ice from below, potentially destabilizing glaciers. Under the ice of East Antarctica, there's a jaw-dropping discovery, a massive crater, the largest known on Earth. It's centered in Wilkes Land and spans roughly 482 kilometers, 300 miles. This crater was likely formed by a titanic asteroid impact, perhaps 50-plus kilometers across, hundreds of millions of years ago. Some believe this impact triggered global cooling and mass extinctions, the Permian-Triassic extinction event. The thought that our icy wastes once hid such a cosmic scar sends chills down my spine. Modern science thrives on Antarctica. In addition to IceCube, universities study the ice cores for climate data, and NASA flies satellites over the poles. For example, Operation Icebridge, NASA aircraft campaigns, has mapped the shape of ice sheets in high resolution. Aerial LiDAR and gravimetric studies keep a watch on ice sheet thickness. Even foreign intelligence satellites focus here. In 2020, the U.S. State Department team inspected the Chinese Qianling base under the treaty's provisions to monitor what China is building. So there's an unusual mix: peaceful scientists next to worried spies. Scientists also scour Antarctica for meteorites. The ice flow concentrates space rocks at certain places. Nearly 50,000 meteorites have been recovered from Antarctic ice, many well preserved. They are invaluable for studying the solar system. One found in Antarctica even contained organic compounds that some say hint at extraterrestrial life, though none has the smoking gun. So Antarctica serves astronomy, geology, and more, under the guise of a quiet frozen desert. What of the future? The stage is set for a high-stakes game. By 2048, the Antarctic Treaty Parties must meet and decide, renew the ban on claiming land, or renegotiate. Big powers are watching each other warily. The United States, historically keeping a low profile, has the largest logistics operation and scientific staff on the ice. China, meanwhile, is the fastest-growing presence, 5 stations from the peninsula to the polar plateau. Australian and European governments keep calling for transparency as Beijing expands. Russia, invoking its legacy, sometimes hints that scientific research could slide into strategic positioning. The environmental changes add urgency. Every summer brings news of melting ice shelves and rising seas. NASA and NOAA satellites measure Antarctic ice mass dropping each year. One recent climate projection suggested parts of Antarctica could warm enough by 2050 to allow grasses and colonies of penguins where only ice now exists. Such a shift would be dramatic. It could mean cities flooding as ice turns to water, and suddenly that forsaken continent is at the center of global attention. Even resource hunts are imagined. Beneath those ice sheets could lie untouched oil, gas, rare minerals, some speculate vast amounts of uranium and nickel, resources currently off-limits by treaty. In an extreme scenario, a group of nations might argue the treaty expired and rush to stake claims on these assets. While this sounds like a dystopian novel, it's not entirely dismissed by analysts. At the same time, Antarctica's ecological threats worry scientists. Thawing permafrost could release ancient pathogens or greenhouse gases. Tourism is increasing, cruise ships, adventure travelers, which raises concerns about both pollution and illicit travelers. Remember, some extreme adventurer might always try to smuggle something out or in. For now, the Antarctic wildlife, from penguins to seals to invisible microorganisms, is under protection, but any legal change could expose it to exploitation. After all these puzzles, ancient maps, frozen lakes of life, medieval disasters, volcanoes, and spy games, one thing is clear to me: we have only scratched the surface of Antarctica's story. It feels like the plot of a thriller. Mysterious discoveries and global power plays all playing out in silence under the cold southern sky. I won't pretend to have all the answers. Some of these mysteries may be resolved by better science, for example, the polar climate puzzle or hidden life. Others might remain forever unanswered. Who carved the iceberg faces? What I can say is that Antarctica will not stay a silent wasteland forever. By mid-century, our decisions about this continent could reshape politics and the planet. Will Antarctica remain the last great laboratory for peaceful science, or will it become contested ground? For now, we continue to watch and study. Modern satellites, submersibles under the ice, and international collaborations all bring new data every year. As global citizens, we should pay attention. The ice is slowly telling us its secrets. In the end, Antarctica is a mirror. It reflects both Earth's ancient past and our hopes and fears for the future. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the unknown. Keep looking up, or rather down into the ice. The next revelation might be just one snowflake away. Remember to subscribe for more investigations and share your thoughts on these Antarctic mysteries. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.